Welcome, dear listener, wherever you are, whether you are settling into bed, preparing to rest, or simply seeking a moment of quiet, you are in the right place. This is a space for calm stories drawn from Buddhist traditions. These are stories that carry the quiet weight of wisdom, unfolding slowly like mist rising over a still lake. Tonight, we invite you to explore the power of patience, not as passivity, but as a steady and courageous strength. The kind of patience that does not flinch under pressure. The kind of patience that remains unmoving while the world rushes by. In Buddhism, this quality is known as santi. It is the ability to bear with difficulty, to endure insult, to hold stillness even in the presence of pain or uncertainty. It is not easy, but it is beautiful, and like all beautiful things, it reveals itself slowly. In the next hour, you will hear stories of monks and hermits, kings and lay people. Each of them lives through a moment of waiting, of breathing through discomfort with quiet grace. These stories remind us that patience is not born from perfection. It is born from small, conscious choices. The choice to wait without bitterness. The choice to breathe rather than react. So take a moment to settle. Breathe in gently and breathe out even more slowly. Let us begin softly with the story of a silent monk, a snow-covered temple, and a lesson that took an entire winter to begin. From the Chinese Chan tradition. In the quiet northern provinces of ancient China, beyond the reach of crowded cities and market noise, there was a forest that held its breath each winter. The trees there were tall and ancient, their branches heavy with snow, their trunks dark and damp with moss. The air, sharp and thin, carried the scent of pine sap and distant smoke. Here, silence was not something imposed. It simply grew on its own. Within this forest stood a monastery, built of stone and aged wood, its walls weathered by years of wind and prayer. No banners hung from its gates, no gold adorned its halls, only the soft toll of temple bells and the slow rhythm of feet passing through snow. This was the place where Bodhidharma lived, a monk whose silence echoed louder than words. His eyes were deep and steady, like the surface of a lake untouched by wind. He did not speak often. He did not teach often. His presence alone was the lesson. People came from many regions, hoping to be accepted as his disciples. Most returned home in silence, their questions unanswered. And yet, stories of the Master continued to spread like drifting smoke, tales of his stillness, his depth, his ability to transmit truth without speaking. One such seeker was a young monk named Huikur. Huikur had walked for many days and nights, his straw sandals worn thin, his robes no match for the mountain chill. He traveled across frozen rivers, climbed icy ridges, and slept beneath bare trees with only a wool shawl for warmth. Each morning his breath rose in clouds. Each night, he whispered the sutras beneath his breath to keep fear and doubt at bay. At last, he reached the monastery. The gates stood closed, their wooden surface worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. No monks greeted him. No lights shone from the windows. Only the sound of snowflakes landing gently on stone. Huikur bowed before the gate and sat. Snow began to fall. At first it was soft, tiny crystals drifting like feathers through the air. Then, more heavily, the ground beneath him vanished beneath a growing white blanket. He waited. One day passed, then another. No one came. He remained seated, his body still, his breath steady. By the third day, the snow had risen past his knees. It clung to the folds of his robe. The cold pressed into his bones like stone, slow and persistent. Still, he did not rise. Imagine him there, alone in the forest, the trees towering above like silent witnesses, the wind whispering through the needles, the snow falling without end. No promise of welcome, no assurance that he had been seen, only the ache of waiting, and something deep within him that would not move. If you close your eyes, you might hear the hush of snow as it gathers on his shoulders, the distant ring of a bell from the inner temple, the soft creak of frozen wood in the walls behind the gate. Stillness surrounded him. Stillness filled him. It was then, on the third day, that the gate finally opened. A figure stepped forward. Bodhidharma. His presence was calm, his robes dark and plain, his face unreadable, like the surface of a moonlit pond. He looked down at Huikur without judgment. "What do you seek?" he asked, voice as quiet as falling snow. Huikur pressed his palms together and bowed, his hands trembling slightly from cold. "I seek your teachings," he said. "I seek to awaken." The master was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Why stand in the snow for words? Return home." He turned as if to leave, but Huikur remained where he was, his body bowed, his breath ragged but steady. Then, slowly, with a clarity that came not from desperation, but from devotion, he reached for the blade at his side, a small traveling knife, the kind used to cut wood or open fruit. He drew it, and in a single motion, he severed his left arm at the elbow. We pause here, not to shock, but to honor what this act symbolized. Not pain, but offering. Not harm, but surrender. In the Chan tradition, this gesture is remembered not for its brutality, but for what it meant, the cutting away of ego, the complete giving of oneself to the search for truth. Blood darkened the snow, yes, but so too did light rise within the moment. Bodhidharma turned again. This time, his eyes softened. He did not see pain. He saw patience, not recklessness, but resolve. Not a boy in agony, but a disciple who had emptied himself of expectation, of pride, of anything that might demand answers. And so, the teacher accepted him. Huikur was taken inside, his wound tended by quiet hands, his body warmed by slow, burning fire. And over the years that followed, he studied beneath Bodhidharma, not through books or speeches, but through the steady presence of a master who taught in silence. The seasons turned. Snow melted into spring, then returned again. Years passed like clouds drifting across a high sky. In time, Huikur would become the second patriarch of Chan Buddhism in China, a teacher in his own right, his words shaped by winter and waiting. But in that first season, he was only a figure in the snow, a man sitting still beneath the weight of cold and sky, breathing, enduring, listening not to a voice, but to silence itself. This story is not told to glorify hardship. It is not told to praise suffering for its own sake. It is told to remind us that sometimes the first and deepest lesson appears when nothing else happens, when no one comes, when we are asked to wait, and in that waiting, discover what we truly carry inside. So let yourself imagine that stillness, the trees, the snow, the hush that lives between thoughts. You may find that a kind of patience is already alive within you. Not loud, not proud, but steady as stone. And sometimes that is all that is needed. In the next story, we leave behind the frozen forest and enter a world of palaces and pride. There, we meet a wandering hermit and a king ruled by fury, and we will see what happens when patience stands before power, not to resist it, but to transform it. From the Jataka tales, early Buddhist literature, in a land warmed by long summers and softened by gentle hills, there lived a king whose shadow stretched far beyond the palace walls. He was strong, clever, and deeply feared. His words could open the gates of joy or plunge a man into darkness. He ruled not only his people, but their moods, their movements, even the way they lowered their eyes when he passed. His palace was built from sandstone and cedar, its outer walls rising like cliffs, with fragrant gardens inside that bloomed with wild jasmine and red hibiscus. Every morning, the scent of incense drifted through its halls, as monks chanted in the distance and servants moved silently in woven slippers. To the eye, it was a world of luxury and precision, but within the heart of the king, peace was absent. He slept poorly. His dreams came in flashes and noise. Some mornings, he rose before the birds began their songs, pacing the cool tiles with thoughts that clung like smoke. No amount of power had calmed the restlessness that stirred beneath his fine robes. One morning, before the sun had touched the temple towers, he summoned his guards. "I will ride," he said, and so the royal horses were brought. He mounted without a word, no fanfare, no retinue, only the sound of hooves striking the earth as he rode alone into the countryside. He rode past golden fields, still covered in morning mist, past herders driving sleepy animals, past the edge of towns where smoke curled from early fires and small children peeked through doors to see the king gallop by. Eventually, his path brought him to the edge of a forest. The road narrowed. Birdsong returned. The air shifted, cooler, greener, filled with the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. Here, time slowed. Here, he could feel the weight of his thoughts more clearly. It was deep in this forest that he saw the figure, an old man, sitting quietly beneath a banyan tree. The man's robes were coarse, dyed the color of ash. His feet were bare. His hands rested gently in his lap, one atop the other, as though he had been sitting for a very long time. The king pulled hard on the reins. The horse stopped. He dismounted. He stepped forward, brushing low branches aside, his armor faintly clinking in the hush. "Who are you?" he asked. The hermit did not open his eyes. "I am no one special," came the soft reply. "I am only one who sits." The king's brow furrowed. "This forest belongs to the crown," he said. "You sit here without permission." The hermit smiled faintly. "Does the wind ask permission to pass through the trees? Do the trees claim the sky above them? I ask for nothing. I take nothing. I simply sit." The king was unused to such answers. He felt his irritation stir. Do you not know who I am?" The hermit opened his eyes. They were clear, like polished stone. "I see you are someone who carries much power, pride, perhaps pain. But I do not know your name." The king's hand drifted toward the hilt of his sword. He looked at the man seated on the earth with no crown, no guards, no fear. He saw something he did not understand, something stronger than resistance, a power not born of force, but of stillness. The sword slipped from his hand and landed softly in the moss. For a while, neither man spoke. Then, without knowing why, the king sat down on the ground across from the hermit. The soil was cool beneath his hands. The air was full of bird calls and the faint sound of a stream nearby. The hermit reached into a small cloth bag and drew out a piece of dried fruit. He placed it gently on a leaf and passed it across the space between them. The king accepted it. There were no more questions. There was no lecture, no teaching, no performance of wisdom. Only two people sitting quietly in a forest clearing, letting the wind move around them and letting the silence do its work. This tale is one of the Jataka stories, a collection of past life accounts in which the Buddha, long before he reached full enlightenment, practiced different virtues through many lifetimes. In this story, the hermit is thought to be one of those forms, not yet a Buddha, but on the way, cultivating a patience that could meet violence with calm, fear with understanding, and pride with gentle presence. We are shown here that patience is not inaction. It is not weakness. It is the ability to stay soft in a hard moment, to remain grounded while another shakes, to listen instead of react, to forgive even when no apology comes. If your breath is still, let it stay slow. If your thoughts are wandering, let them wander. You may imagine yourself in that forest, seated beside the hermit, a soft breeze touching your cheek, sunlight warming your closed eyelids. No past, no future, only this, only stillness. This is the shape of patience, not sharp but wide, not loud but steady. And sometimes that is what melts even the heaviest sword. In our next story, we leave the courts and kings behind and enter the quiet world of a village woman. She does not seek a throne or carry a sword. Her patience takes another form, waiting through years of ordinary life, trusting what cannot yet be seen, and finding freedom not through conquest, but through kindness. From a Theravada Buddhist folk tradition, far from temples and palaces, along the winding edge of a small river, there lay a village where time moved with the rhythm of seasons. The homes were made of clay and thatch. The paths were soft with dust. In the early morning, the air smelled of smoke from breakfast fires and the sweet scent of tamarind boiling into chutney. It was the kind of place where every face was known, where news traveled not through letters, but through open windows and shared water jars. Life here was not dramatic, but it was not easy. Among the many villagers lived a woman named Samudi. She was neither wealthy nor poor, not known for beauty or fame. She was simply present. Each morning she rose before the sun. She swept the floor of her small home. She lit a lamp its flame flickering against the mud walls. And she prepared rice, slowly and carefully, her hands moving as her mother's had before her. Samudi lived alone. Her husband had died many years before, and the child they had long hoped for never came. Still, she lived with quiet steadiness. She tended her garden. She offered water to passing monks. She smiled when children played outside her gate. But beneath her gentle routine, Samudi carried a private longing, not a restless desire, not a clinging hope, just a quiet ache, a question she could never quite answer. Why, in all these years of devotion, of offerings, of right action, had the blessings she hoped for never arrived? One day, a visiting monk passed through the village. He was older, his robes faded by time and sun, his bowl held in hands that trembled slightly from age. When Samudi saw him, she paused. There was something in his face, not authority, not charm, but deep stillness. She brought him water, then rice, then a small dish of lentils seasoned with salt. As he ate beneath the neem tree in her yard, she sat nearby, her knees folded beneath her sari, her hands resting in her lap. "Venerable sir," she said softly, "may I ask you a question that has sat in my chest for many years?" He looked up and nodded, saying nothing. "I have tried to live rightly. I speak gently. I give to the Sangha. I take only what I need, yet my arms remain empty. No children to hold, no blessings that change my life. Only the same mornings, the same walls, the same silence. Is this all there is?" The monk took a slow sip of water before speaking. "There is a story," he said, "of a woman just like you," and slowly he told it. In another village, long ago, there lived a woman who carried the same ache. She, too, waited year after year, her arms empty, her prayers soft but persistent, and one night she dreamed of a temple far to the south. She saw, in the dream, an old banyan tree, a monk, a golden bowl. When she awoke, she knew what she must do. She walked for many days, through dust and rain, through forests thick with vines. She arrived at the temple, tired, blistered, but hopeful. There, beneath the banyan tree, sat the monk she had seen in her dream. She approached him and bowed. "Venerable one," she said, "I have come seeking a blessing. I have waited many years. Please offer me a teaching." The monk looked at her and said, "Take this bowl, fill it with patience, and return." She blinked. The bowl he handed her was empty. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Fill it," he said, "with patience." And so she left. She walked back to her village with the bowl in hand. She did not understand, but she waited. Each day, she held it for a few moments. She placed it beside her garden. She carried it while she tended her goats. She dusted it when it grew dull, and over time, something began to shift. The bowl did not fill with rice, nor with gold, but she began to see her days differently. When the wind moved the trees, she heard a kind of music. When a child passed by, laughing, she felt a joy she could not explain. When her neighbor came weeping, she found herself listening without needing to fix anything. The bowl remained empty, but her heart did not. Years passed. One evening, while sweeping her doorstep, she saw a traveler walking the path toward her village. He looked tired, and his eyes familiar. It was the monk, much older now, his beard white, his steps slow. She ran to him and bowed. "I kept the bowl," she said. "I filled it with patience, just as you told me. But still, it is empty." He looked down and smiled. "Child," he said, "it is full. You just cannot see it." He reached into the bowl, and from it he drew a single lotus flower, its petals white, its fragrance soft as rain, and then he walked on. The visiting monk in Samudhi's courtyard finished his story. He placed his bowl gently beside him. Samudhi sat in silence. She looked around at her home, at the worn floor, the clean bowls stacked neatly, at the sound of children outside, at the way the wind gently stirred the curtain. She felt no sudden change, no lightning in the sky, but something inside her exhaled. She bowed her head. "Thank you," she whispered, and the monk, smiling gently, continued on his way. This story reminds us that patience is not waiting for reward. It is the act of remaining open, even when no answer comes. It is sweeping the floor even when no guest arrives. It is placing water on the altar even when no miracle descends. And in this way, our lives become the blessing, the empty bowl, the quiet dawn, the soft repetition of ordinary days. All of it becomes sacred when held with patience. Let this stillness fill you now. No need to strive, no need to grasp. The bowl may be empty, but it is already full. In the next story, we turn to one of the Buddha's own final teachings. A story of one monk's fierce doubt and the long, slow road toward understanding. It is a tale that unfolds not in action, but in the gentle unfolding of trust. From the Mahaparinibbana Sutta Pali Canon, the last rains had come. The forest paths were slick with wet leaves. Insects moved quietly beneath ferns, and the sky remained low, heavy with silence. The Buddha was nearing the end of his journey. He had traveled across countless regions, taught kings and beggars, sat in palaces and forests. He had watched students come and go, some growing like spring bamboo, others breaking away like dry branches. But always, beside him, there was one figure, one constant presence. His name was Ānanda. He was the Buddha's cousin and his devoted attendant. For 25 years, Ānanda had walked beside the Buddha, carrying his robe, preparing his seat, learning his words by heart. If you picture him now, you might see a man with a kind face, eyes lined with sleeplessness, but also with love, a robe slightly worn at the hems from travel, and always a quiet readiness to serve. Yet even after all those years, Ānanda had not yet awakened. He had seen the Buddha perform miracles. He had memorized sermons, debated skeptics, served with gentleness and care. And still, the final door, that elusive moment of awakening, remained closed to him. Many wondered why. Was it lack of insight? Was it clinging? Was it fatigue from too many years of service? But the Buddha said nothing of that. Instead, he simply accepted Ānanda's presence. And perhaps in that silence was the teaching itself. The time came when the Buddha grew ill. The end approached quietly, like dusk settling over a quiet field. They had reached a small grove near Kusinara. There, the Buddha lay between two sal trees. Their blossoms fell out of season, as if even the trees bowed in farewell. The monks gathered. They wept. They whispered among themselves, and Ānanda stood at the edge of the grove. Watching, he did not cry out. He did not interrupt. He simply stood there, his heart stretched between grief and service. When the Buddha saw him, he spoke, "Do not grieve, Ānanda. You have served me with loving kindness, with body, with speech, with mind, patiently, without fault. You will be awakened soon, but not yet." Even in that final moment, the last step did not come. Not in the shadow of death, not in the presence of 1,000 teachings, not even in the Buddha's final blessing. And so Ānanda waited. He continued his service. He watched the cremation. He helped gather the relics. He sat in the councils that followed. Years passed. The world moved forward. The Buddha's teachings spread like water across thirsty ground. Still, Ānanda waited. And then, one night, after teaching others for many years, Ānanda sat alone in meditation. There was no miracle, no light splitting the sky, no voice from the heavens, only the sound of night birds, the slow rise and fall of his breath, the flicker of an oil lamp on the far wall, and quietly, like dawn arriving without sound, Ānanda awakened. It had not come quickly. It had not come during the height of passion or in the echo of sacred words. It had come in stillness, in service, in patient waiting. This story is not often told with flourish. It does not end with fireworks or final declarations. But it carries a kind of truth that many of us know in our bones, that not everything arrives when we want it. That effort, devotion, even love, do not guarantee swift results. And that sometimes awakening is not a flash, but a quiet unfolding. Ānanda's story is for those who feel forgotten, for those who have served faithfully, without reward, for those who wait, not passively, but with gentle persistence. His life reminds us that patience is not a pause. It is a path, a slow, quiet walk through years of repetition, the same robe, the same questions, the same footsteps, and yet something grows, something ripens. Like fruit that takes a season too long, like blossoms that fall out of season just when you thought spring had passed. If you feel yourself waiting for something, a clarity, a release, a peace you cannot quite name, let Ānanda sit with you now, not as a master, but as a companion, both of you resting in the same gentle, not knowing, listening, breathing, trusting that something will come, even if you never see it arrive. Let the breath remain slow. Let the silence of Ānanda's vigil linger, just a little longer. You've now walked beside a man who waited through lifetimes to understand what was always unfolding within him. Not with urgency, but with the deep patience that grows from devotion. And now we turn to another story, older still, a story from a time long before the Buddha's final days, when he was not yet a teacher, but a Bodhisattva, a being still cultivating the path. This is a tale of waiting that asks for something even greater, not waiting for insight, but waiting with love, a love so wide, so silent, so complete, it is willing to offer everything. It takes place beneath the trees of a wild forest, where no cities rise and no monks chant, only the hush of nature, with the hunger of a mother, and a patience too deep for words. From the Jataka tales, a story of sacrifice and serene compassion, far in the Himalayan foothills, beyond the reach of villages or temples, there is a forest where the trees rise like stone towers. The ground is soft with fallen needles. The light filters through branches in long golden threads. It is a place of quiet forgetting, where even time seems to slow and sit down. In that forest, long ago, a young man walked. He wore no jewels. He carried no staff, only a simple robe and eyes that had begun to see the world not in fragments, but in patterns. How life rises, how it falls, how all beings turn toward warmth and flee from suffering. He was not yet the Buddha, but he was close. In this life, he was a Bodhisattva, one who had vowed to awaken, not for himself alone, but for the benefit of all beings. Each step he took was a practice, each breath a preparation, not for glory, but for stillness, the kind of stillness that listens to pain without shrinking from it. As he walked beneath the towering sal trees, he came to a clearing. There, the air smelled of dry leaves, of sap, and something else, a faint metallic tang that clung to the wind. At the edge of the clearing, nestled among thorny shrubs, lay a tigress. She was thin. Her ribs rose like hills beneath her striped fur. Her breath came shallow and slow. Beside her, barely moving, were two tiny cubs, eyes closed, bellies flat, mouths seeking milk that no longer flowed. The Bodhisattva stopped. He did not cry out. He did not turn away. He simply observed. The tigress's body trembled as she tried to rise. Her eyes were wild, not with malice, but with desperation. Hunger had undone her strength. Soon, she would no longer be able to care for her cubs. And yet, she still tried. The Bodhisattva stood for a long time in silence. He felt no fear, only a widening ache, and within that ache, something even quieter, a question. Not, what can I do? But, what does love look like now? There was no one to witness this moment, no student to remember it, no disciple to write it down, only the trees, the wind, and the stillness. The Bodhisattva turned away from the tigress and walked into the forest. He found a sharp stone. He knelt beside it, and with complete calm, not haste, not drama, he made a small cut on his arm, just enough to draw blood. He returned to the clearing. He stood a short distance from the tigress and let a few drops fall to the earth. The scent reached her nostrils, her ears twitched, her head lifted, and slowly, cautiously, she rose. The Bodhisattva stepped closer. He knelt before her, eyes open, breath steady. In the texts, it is said that he offered himself, not with sadness, not with fear, but with maitri, loving kindness that has no boundary, and with santi, patience so deep it no longer separates self from other. The tigress fed. Her strength returned. She nursed her cubs. They lived. And the Bodhisattva, through that quiet, final act, deepened the path that would lead, lifetimes later, to his full awakening. This is not a story about death. It is a story about readiness. A readiness to respond to suffering not with control, but with presence. The Bodhisattva could have walked away. He could have rationalized the moment, told himself that nature would take its course, that tigers are dangerous, that some lives are not meant to be saved. But instead, he waited. He watched. He listened to the silence beneath the pain. And in that silence, a different answer emerged. Not escape, not reaction, but surrender. The kind that requires the deepest kind of patience. There are times in our own lives when we are asked to wait, not for events to change, but for our hearts to open enough to meet the moment fully. It may not be as dramatic. It may look like sitting beside someone who cannot be comforted, or choosing not to defend ourselves in the face of anger, or offering kindness to a person who may never return it. Patience is not passive. It is presence without demand. It is love without expectation. It is the willingness to stay near suffering without needing it to disappear. So now, in this quiet moment, you might imagine the forest again, the trees, the wind, the slow breath of a tigress curled around her cubs, and nearby, the echo of a life offered not with noise, but with stillness, and in that stillness, a lesson so soft, it can only be heard in silence. In the next story, we travel not to a forest or a palace, but to the highlands, where bamboo bends in the wind, and a humble man learns that sometimes to wait is to grow in a direction we do not yet understand. A folk-inspired Buddhist parable from the mountain villages, high in the hills, where the land begins to rise like sleeping giants, and the mist clings to the soil each morning. There once lived a bamboo cutter. His home was small, a single room with a thatched roof and a stone step worn smooth from decades of use. The walls were lined with tools, old blades, a wooden mallet, coils of thread, and stacks of drying bamboo. From the eaves, wind chimes hung, made not of metal, but of hollow reeds. When the wind moved through them, it sounded like distant voices whispering old songs. His name was Ānanda. No one paid much attention to him in the village. He was neither a monk nor a merchant. He had no family to speak of, and his clothes were simple and sun-faded. He walked with a slight stoop, his shoulders carrying years of quiet labor. Each day, Ānanda made his way into the hills. He moved slowly, never in a rush. He listened to the birds, watched the bees gather nectar, waited for the right stalks to reveal themselves. Not too young, not too dry. When he found them, he cut them gently, never taking more than he needed. He would bring them home and begin the process of shaping them. He soaked the stalks, scraped the husks, split them into thin strips, and wove them into baskets, flutes, and sometimes fishing traps for the children who played near the stream. His craft was modest but steady. There was rhythm to it, a pace set not by the world, but by the seasons. One year, the rains did not come. At first, the streams thinned, then the ponds shrank, then, slowly, the bamboo stopped growing, the hills dried, the earth cracked, the wind lost its scent. Villagers panicked. They ran to the market, looking for grain. They whispered of curses, of punishment, of abandonment by the gods. But Ānanda waited. Each morning, he swept his step. He sharpened his blade. He walked into the hills, even when the paths were dusty and the bamboo was brittle. He sat beneath his favorite tree and listened, not for signs, but for stillness. People mocked him. "There is no bamboo left to cut," they said. "There is no rain. Why do you keep going?" He would simply smile and say, "Because the earth has not finished speaking." Months passed. The wind turned colder. The skies remained dry. And still Ānanda waited, not with hope, not with fear, but with the same patience he had given to every stalk of bamboo every day of his life. And then, one evening, it came. Not in a storm, not with thunder, just a soft drizzle that fell like a sigh across the leaves. The next morning, the ground was dark again, moist, alive. Within days, new shoots began to rise, tiny green fingers, pushing gently through the soil. Ānanda was ready. He moved among them with care, guiding their growth, building new baskets, teaching the younger villagers who came to watch. They had expected panic. He had offered patience. They had watched the sky. He had listened to the earth. This story may sound simple. It is. But sometimes simplicity carries the deepest truths. We are taught to act, to fix, to intervene. But there is a kind of wisdom that waits, that trusts the rhythms beneath the surface, that understands not everything blooms on demand. Patience is not the same as delay. It is a kind of faith, not in outcomes, but in cycles. The bamboo cutter knew that not all dry seasons mean death. Some simply mean pause. Some invite us to become still enough to feel the ground again. So if you are waiting for clarity, for energy, for something unknown to rise, let yourself be like the bamboo, rooted even in dryness, still growing even when it cannot be seen, ready to bend but not to break. You may now imagine yourself in the hills, the breeze brushing your face, the smell of earth after rain, and nearby, the soft knock of bamboo stalks shifting gently in the wind. Let that sound carry you. Let the waiting be enough. In our next story, the stillness deepens. It is the story of a potter and a bowl that never seemed to take shape until time and patience turned the flaw into something beautiful. A parable from village life, handed down in quiet places, in a quiet village where dust settled slowly after the morning wind. There lived an old potter named Dhiren. His home sat near the edge of the town, beside a narrow path that led to the river. Each day, villagers walked past his door, carrying firewood, calling to children, herding animals toward the water. Dhiren's home was small, a simple room with a wheel, a kiln, and rows of shelves that bowed under the weight of fired clay. The air always smelled of earth, wood smoke, and ash. On some days, the faint scent of river water drifted in when the breeze came from the south. He had worked the wheel for nearly 40 years. His hands were lined with tiny scars, not from accidents, but from the shape of the work itself. Fingers constantly wet, constantly pressing, constantly learning the subtle difference between too soft and too dry. He rarely spoke, but his bowls were in every home. Bowls for rice, for lentils, for water, some worn smooth from daily use, some cracked and lovingly repaired with copper staples or resin. Among the many he shaped, there was one bowl he kept on the highest shelf. It was not beautiful. The glaze had run unevenly. The curve was slightly warped, and near the rim, a hairline crack traced its way from edge to center, thin but visible. Young potters would sometimes visit and ask, "Why do you keep this flawed bowl?" Dhiren would smile. "That bowl," he'd say, "taught me more than any perfect one." The story behind the bowl was quiet. Years ago, Dhiren had been asked to craft an offering bowl for the local monastery. It was to be used during alms rounds, a sacred object to be held by monks who asked for nothing but received everything. He chose the finest clay. He shaped it with care, smoothing each edge, measuring each curve. But the season was damp. The kiln burned unevenly, and when he opened the chamber, the bowl had cracked. He stared at it for a long time. Part of him wanted to throw it away. Another part wanted to hide it. But instead, he placed it gently on the shelf. And then, every morning for the next several weeks, he returned to the wheel, not to repair the crack, not to fix the flaw, but to try again. With the same clay, the same care, he made dozens of bowls, each slightly different, some better, some worse, and all the while, the cracked bowl sat quietly on its shelf, watching, reminding him that patience is not the refusal to fail. It is the willingness to fail again and again without turning away. Eventually, he shaped a bowl that held, smooth, strong, beautifully curved. It was offered to the monks. They used it for years. It traveled from village to village. It fed many. But the cracked bowl remained. It never held food. It never left the shelf. And yet, it was never forgotten, because that bowl carried something else, a record of effort, of trying, of returning, of patience not rewarded but practiced. It had never been broken apart, only cracked. And that was enough. We are taught to value what succeeds, but patience often grows in the places where success is not guaranteed. In the bowls that don't hold, in the conversations that don't resolve, in the work that doesn't yield fruit for many years. To wait is one thing, but to return, to keep showing up again and again, even when the shape is imperfect. This is the kind of patience that transforms a life. Perhaps you carry a cracked bowl inside you, a plan that didn't unfold, a relationship that frayed, a dream set quietly on a shelf. You don't need to hide it. You don't need to fix it. You only need to stay close to it, to notice it, to let it remind you that time, when held with kindness, can change even the deepest flaws into gentle teachers. Now imagine the room again, the turning of the wheel, the warmth of the kiln, the shelves lined with clay, some perfect, some not, and on the highest shelf a quiet bowl, still cracked, still loved. Let the image of the potter's wheel slowly fade, the turning slowing, the cracked bowl still resting quietly on its shelf. You've now heard many stories of waiting, through seasons, through silence, through lifetimes. Some spoke of action, others of surrender, and all of them have asked one thing of us: to remain, to stay. Now, as we near the close of this long, gentle journey, we offer one last story, not from the mountaintops or forest groves, but from the streets of a small village where one grieving mother came searching for relief and instead found something deeper, a truth so soft it could only be carried by patience. From the Pali Canon, the story of Kisagotami, in a quiet village at the edge of a kingdom, where rice paddies stretched wide under pale sky, there lived a woman named Kisagotami. She was young when she married, full of laughter, quick with her hands, soft in speech. Soon she bore a son, a small child with strong lungs, dark eyes, and a face that seemed, to her, to hold the entire future. She carried him everywhere, tied to her hip while she drew water, wrapped against her chest as she ground grain, cradled in her lap as she mended cloth in the evenings. His presence was her breath, her heartbeat. But one morning, before the birds had finished their first song, the child fell ill. A fever took him, fast, quiet, merciless. By dusk, he was still. Kisagotami did not cry. She did not scream. She simply sat beside him, rocking him gently, as if the rhythm alone might call him back. When neighbors came to offer condolences, she shook her head. "He is only sleeping," she said. "He only needs medicine." There must be someone who knows the cure. And with that, she began to walk. From house to house, village to village, she knocked on doors, holding her lifeless son in her arms. Each time she asked, "Please, do you have medicine? Something that can bring back breath?" People turned their eyes away. Some wept, some whispered, but none could offer what she asked for. Finally, an old man placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. If anyone has what you seek, it will be him." She did not hesitate. She walked through the night, dust rising around her bare feet, her arms aching with the weight of her child. At dawn, she reached the monastery. The Buddha sat beneath a tree, quiet as the morning wind, his gaze soft, unwavering. She placed the child before him. "Please," she said, "you are wise. You are powerful. I am told you know what others do not. Give me the medicine that will heal my son." The Buddha looked at her for a long time, and then he nodded. "Yes," he said, "there is a medicine." Her eyes widened. "But," he continued, "to make it, I will need a single mustard seed." She nodded eagerly. "There is only one condition," he said. "It must come from a household that has never known death, a home where no one has ever died." She rose at once and ran. From door to door, she knocked again. Her voice was hopeful now, lighter, urgent. But at each home, the answer was the same. "We have mustard seeds," they said. "But my grandmother passed last year. My husband died during the last flood. My child fell ill 2 winters ago. My brother never returned from war." Again and again, she heard the same truth, and slowly her steps began to slow. Her voice became quiet. Her arms grew heavy, and somewhere between one home and the next, she finally stopped. She looked down at her child, and for the first time, she truly saw him, not sleeping, not waiting, but gone. She sat down on the earth, not to beg, not to search, but to weep, not with noise, but with the slow, aching release that comes when grief is finally allowed to breathe. When she returned to the Buddha, she no longer carried the body, only her own. He looked at her, and in that look, there was no triumph, no lesson delivered, no sharp word, only presence, compassion that did not fix, but remained. And in that stillness, Kisagotami bowed, not to the Buddha, but to the truth she had come to know. That death is not punishment, that suffering is not unique, and that patience is not numbness, but the gentle endurance of the heart when it can no longer hold what it loves, but still chooses to remain. This story, soft as a breath, is the final offering in our journey. It does not teach you how to avoid pain. It does not promise a cure. Instead, it holds your hand and invites you to sit beside your own aching places quietly, lovingly, patiently, because healing is not always loud. Sometimes it is the slow return to yourself, the moment when searching ends and being begins. Now, let this story dissolve like smoke. Let your breath return to its natural rhythm. Let your body soften as if into warm earth. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are only waiting, and that, too, is a kind of practice, a kind of path, a kind of peace. As the final story settles softly in your mind, let the echoes of ancient forests, bamboo groves, and quiet villages mingle gently with the rhythm of your breath. Each story you have heard is a thread, woven into a fabric of waiting, woven into a pattern of becoming. Patience is not a burden to bear. It is not a pause between moments. It is a gentle current flowing quietly beneath the surface of our lives. It is in the silent vigil of Ānanda, the Bodhisattva's calm offering beside the Tigress, the bamboo cutter's quiet trust in the coming rain, and the potter's tender care for his cracked bowl. It is the woman who sought a cure, only to find healing in surrender. Imagine these lives softly interwoven with your own. The waiting you have carried, the stillness you have practiced, the small kindnesses you have offered to yourself and others. They are not small. They are the slow unfolding of a life lived with grace. Now, as your body sinks deeper into rest and your mind drifts toward the quiet spaces between thoughts, let patience be your lullaby. Let it cradle you as the night deepens, soft as a whisper, steady as the turning of the earth. You do not need to rush. You do not need to solve. You only need to be. In this moment, there is enough. In this breath, there is peace. Sleep now, gently held by the quiet wisdom of patience. And when you awaken, may you carry its calm strength with you. Good night.